The machines never stopped beeping. In room 314 of General Hospital, each mechanical rhythm marked another moment that Naomi Patterson hadn't opened her eyes. 3 weeks now since the paramedics found her crumpled on her kitchen floor, blood pooling beneath her head like spilled wine on white tile. Her mother, Rose Patterson, sat in the hard plastic chair beside the bed, holding her daughter's lifeless hand. The calluses on Rose's palms, earned from 30 years of cleaning other people's houses, caught on the hospital bracelet wrapped around Naomi's wrist. "Baby girl," Rose whispered, her voice cracking like dry autumn leaves. "I know you can hear me. I know you're fighting in there." But Naomi wasn't fighting. She was floating somewhere between memory and darkness, where Derek's voice couldn't reach her, where his fists couldn't find her, where the fear that had become her constant companion finally grew quiet. Dr. Simone Crawford entered the room with the soft footsteps of someone who'd learned to move through grief without making noise. At 35, she'd seen enough broken bodies to know the difference between accident and intention. The fracture patterns on Naomi's skull told a story that Derek Mitchell's stammering explanation couldn't erase. "Mrs. Patterson," Dr. Crawford said gently, placing a warm hand on Rose's shoulder. "How are you holding up today?" Rose looked up with eyes that had cried themselves empty. "She moved her fingers yesterday. I swear she did. Just a little twitch, but I saw it." Dr. Crawford had heard this before. Desperate love creating movement where none existed. But she checked Naomi's chart anyway because hope was sometimes all families had left. "The swelling in her brain is going down," Dr. Crawford said, studying the latest scans. "That's good news. But Rose, I need you to understand, recovery from this kind of trauma takes time. If it happens at all." The words hit Rose like physical blows. If it happens at all. 3 weeks ago, her daughter had been alive, laughing on the phone about finally getting the promotion at the marketing firm where she worked. Now she lay motionless, breathing only because machines forced air into her lungs. "Where is that husband of hers?" Dr. Crawford asked, though she knew the answer. Derek had visited exactly twice since the incident. Both times when he knew other people would be around, both times putting on the performance of a devastated husband. "Work," Rose said, the word bitter in her mouth. "Always work with that man. Even now." Dr. Crawford nodded, making a mental note. In her experience, truly devoted husbands didn't have work that kept them away from their comatose wives. They camped out in hospital rooms. They demanded answers. They moved heaven and earth for the women they loved. Derek Mitchell did none of those things. Across town, Derek sat in his office cubicle, staring at his computer screen without seeing the numbers that blurred together. His coworkers had stopped asking about Naomi after the second week. Their sympathy had been genuine but brief, the way concern always was when tragedy happened to someone you barely knew. He told himself the same story he'd been telling everyone else. Naomi had fallen down the stairs. A terrible accident. These things happened. But in the quiet moments when no one was watching, when he didn't have to perform grief, Derek's hands shook. He hadn't meant for it to go that far. The fights had been getting worse, sure, but he'd never. The morning came back to him in flashes he tried to push away. Naomi's face when she said she was leaving him. The rage that consumed everything rational. The sound her head made when it hit the kitchen counter. His phone buzzed. A text from Rose, "Visiting hours end at 9. She's still waiting for you." Derek deleted the message without responding. He couldn't go back to that room, couldn't look at what he'd done. Couldn't sit beside the bed and pretend to be a loving husband while the machines kept count of every breath his violence had stolen. Back at the hospital, Nurse Jasmine Torres was ending her shift when she stopped by room 314. At 26, she'd been nursing for only 3 years, but something about Naomi's case had gotten under her skin. Maybe it was the way Rose never left her daughter's side. Maybe it was the suspicious bruises that had faded but weren't forgotten. Or maybe it was the gut feeling that Derek Mitchell was hiding something behind his practiced expressions of concern. "Any changes today?" Jasmine asked Dr. Crawford as they stood in the hallway. "Her brain activity is improving. Slowly, but it's there." Dr. Crawford lowered her voice. "Jasmine, I need you to document everything. Every visitor, every conversation, every detail about her husband's behavior when he's here. Something isn't right about this situation." Jasmine nodded. She'd been thinking the same thing. "The police report said accidental fall, but I've seen enough accidents to know what they look like. This wasn't one." "We can't prove anything yet," Dr. Crawford said. "But when Naomi wakes up, she's going to need people in her corner who believed her when she couldn't speak for herself." That night, Rose finally went home to the small house where she'd raised Naomi and her younger brother Elijah. The silence felt wrong without her children's voices filling the rooms. Elijah's military portrait still sat on the mantel beside family photos. Handsome in his dress uniform, smiling that crooked smile that could charm anyone. 2 years since the army had told her he was missing in action, presumed dead. 2 years since she'd buried an empty coffin and tried to accept that she'd lost her baby boy to a war that never should have taken him. Now Naomi lay fighting for her life, and Rose felt the cruel mathematics of loss adding up around her. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to Derek's number, then put it away without calling. What could she say to the man who claimed to love her daughter but couldn't be bothered to sit beside her hospital bed? What words existed for the rage that burned in her chest every time she thought about the night Naomi fell down the stairs? Instead, Rose knelt beside her bed and prayed to a God who seemed to be testing her faith past the breaking point. She prayed for her daughter's healing, for justice if justice was needed, and for strength to face whatever truth was coming. In room 314, the machines kept their vigil. Naomi's chest rose and fell with mechanical precision while her mind drifted through dreams that felt more like memories. She was 7 years old again, running through the backyard while Elijah chased her with a water balloon. She was 18, crying on his shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. She was 26, watching him ship out to Afghanistan, not knowing it would be the last time she'd see his face. Somewhere in the darkness behind her closed eyes, Naomi was still fighting, still hoping, still waiting for someone to save her from the nightmare her life had become. She just didn't know yet that salvation was already on its way. Dr. Simone Crawford arrived at the hospital early, as was her habit when difficult cases kept her awake at night. Room 314 had become one of those cases, not just because of Naomi's condition, but because of the questions that multiplied each day Derek Mitchell failed to show up. She found Rose already there, of course, reading aloud from a romance novel Naomi had left on her nightstand at home. She always loved these stories, Rose explained, not looking up from the pages. Said they reminded her that happy endings were possible, even when life got messy. Dr. Crawford checked Naomi's vitals, noting the subtle improvements that gave her hope. "Has Derek been by this morning?" Rose's jaw tightened. "He called. Said he had an important meeting." Again. She finally looked up from the book, her eyes blazing with an anger that had been building for weeks. "Doctor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course." "My daughter didn't fall down no stairs, did she?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Crawford had been expecting it, dreading it, preparing for it. She sat down in the second chair, the one Derek should have been occupying. "What makes you ask that?" "I raised that girl. Watched her learn to walk, learn to run, learn to be careful. Naomi never fell downstairs in her whole life. She was always sure-footed, always graceful. And those stairs in her house? I helped Derek build that railing myself when they first moved in. It's solid as a rock." Rose's voice dropped to a whisper. "But more than that, I've been seeing changes in her for months. The way she flinched when he touched her. How she stopped talking about their future together. The sadness she tried to hide behind her smiles." Dr. Crawford weighed her words carefully. "I can't make any legal determinations about what happened. But I can tell you that Naomi's injuries are consistent with blunt force trauma to the head. The pattern suggests impact with a flat surface, not a fall downstairs." The romance novel slipped from Rose's hands. "He hurt my baby. We don't know for certain." "Yes, we do." Rose stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the parking lot. "We know, and I know, and deep down that coward knows we know. The question is what we're going to do about it." Across town, Derek was discovering that lies required more lies to survive. His co-workers had stopped asking about Naomi, but his supervisor hadn't stopped asking about his productivity. The important meeting he'd used to excuse missing another hospital visit was actually a disciplinary conference about missed deadlines and distracted work. "Look, Derek," his boss said, leaning back in his chair. "I get it. What you're going through is unimaginable. But it's been 3 weeks and your work is suffering. Maybe you should take some time off, be with your wife." The suggestion felt like an accusation. "I've been handling things fine. The work is getting done." "Barely. And frankly, if my wife was in a coma, I wouldn't be handling anything fine. I'd be a mess. I'd be at that hospital every spare minute I had." Derek left the meeting with official orders to take 2 weeks of personal leave, time he was supposed to spend at Naomi's bedside. Instead, he drove to a bar on the other side of town where nobody knew his name or his story. The afternoon crowd was sparse. A few construction workers just off shift, a woman in a business suit drowning her lunch break in white wine, and Derek, staring at his reflection in the amber liquid of his third whiskey. He hadn't meant to hurt her. That was the truth he clung to even as it felt more hollow each day. But meaning didn't matter when your wife was fighting for her life because of your hands, your rage, your complete loss of control. The bartender, a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, wiped down glasses while keeping one eye on her customers. She'd seen Derek's type before. Men who drank away their guilt instead of facing it, who sat in dark corners hoping alcohol would wash away whatever they'd done. "You okay, honey?" she asked when Derek's glass emptied again. "My wife is in the hospital," he said, the words slurring slightly. "Accident. I'm sorry to hear that. She going to be all right?" Derek stared into his empty glass. "I don't know. She's been unconscious for weeks. The doctors say, they say it's hard to tell." "That's rough. You must be spending a lot of time at the hospital." The question caught him off guard, and for a moment Derek saw himself through her eyes, a man drinking alone in the middle of the afternoon while his wife lay dying. The image made him sick. "I needed a break," he said defensively. "It's hard, you know, seeing her like that." The bartender nodded, but her expression had shifted. She'd worked in bars long enough to recognize the difference between grief and guilt. "What happened to her? If you don't mind me asking." "She fell. Down the stairs at our house. Hit her head." "That's terrible. Falls can be so dangerous." She paused, studying his face. "Must have been some fall." Derek looked up sharply, but the bartender had already moved on to other customers. Still, he felt exposed, like she could see through his carefully constructed story to the truth underneath. Back at the hospital, Detective Carmen Hayes was having her own moment of clarity. At 42, she'd worked enough domestic violence cases to recognize the patterns. The suspicious circumstances, the absent husband, the family's growing doubts. She'd been meaning to follow up on the Patterson case for days, and Dr. Crawford's call that morning had moved it to the top of her list. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Detective Hayes said as she settled into the hospital room's third chair. Rose and Dr. Crawford sat beside Naomi's bed like sentries guarding their wounded warrior. "We need to know what really happened to my daughter," Rose said without preamble. "And I think you need to know too." Detective Hayes pulled out her notebook. "Tell me about your concerns." For the next hour, Rose and Dr. Crawford painted a picture that looked nothing like the accident report in Derek's file. They talked about Naomi's changes in behavior, Derek's suspicious absence from the hospital, and the medical evidence that didn't match the official story. "I've been a police officer for 20 years, Detective Hayes said finally. "I've seen a lot of accidents and I've seen a lot of domestic violence cases. This feels like the latter." "So what can you do?" Dr. Crawford asked. "I can reopen the investigation. Interview Derek again, this time with harder questions. Look for evidence we might have missed the first time around. But I need to be honest, without Naomi's testimony, building a case is going to be difficult." Rose reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Then we better pray she wakes up to tell her story." As Detective Hayes left the hospital, she made a mental note to dig deeper into Derek Mitchell's background. In her experience, men who put their wives in comas usually had a history of violence. Finding that history was often the key to getting justice. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Staff Sergeant Elijah Patterson was finishing what he thought might be his last day in a military hospital. 2 years of surgeries, physical therapy, and psychological treatment were finally coming to an end. The shrapnel had been removed from his legs, the broken bones had healed, and the nightmares were becoming manageable. Most importantly, he was ready to go home. "Your discharge papers will be ready tomorrow," the doctor told him during their final consultation. "Are you sure you have somewhere to go? The transition back to civilian life can be difficult." Elijah smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed in 2 years. "I'm going home to my family. My mom and my sister. They don't even know I'm alive." The army had declared him dead after his unit was ambushed and his body never recovered. What they didn't know was that Elijah had been pulled from the wreckage by local villagers who nursed him back to health in a remote village where military rescue teams never looked. By the time he was strong enough to make contact, official channels had declared him Kia and moved on. He'd spent months fighting military bureaucracy to prove he was alive, longer still recovering from injuries that should have killed him. But now, finally, he was going home to surprise the family that had mourned him. Elijah had no idea that while he'd been fighting to come back from the dead, his sister had been fighting for her life in a hospital bed, put there by the hands of a man who claimed to love her. He had no idea that his homecoming was about to become something much more than a joyful reunion. It was about to become a reckoning. The knock at Rose Patterson's door came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3.5 weeks after Naomi was found unconscious on her kitchen floor. Rose was already awake, as she had been every morning since the accident, sitting at her kitchen table with cold coffee and hospital visiting schedules spread in front of her. She moved toward the door with the slow steps of someone who had learned that unexpected news usually brought more pain. Through the peephole, she saw a man in military dress uniform, standing straight and tall on her front porch. Her heart clenched. Had they come to tell her something about Elijah? Some final confirmation of what she already knew? She opened the door with trembling hands. "Mrs. Patterson?" the officer said. "I'm Staff Sergeant Williams. I'm here about your son, Elijah Patterson." "He's been dead for 2 years," Rose whispered, gripping the doorframe for support. The officer smiled gently. "No, ma'am. He hasn't. May I come in?" The next hour passed like a fever dream. Rose sat on her couch, the same couch where she'd collapsed when they first told her Elijah was missing, presumed dead, while Staff Sergeant Williams explained about remote villages and impossible recoveries, about military bureaucracy and men who refused to stay buried. "He's alive," she kept repeating as if saying it out loud would make it real. "My baby boy is alive. More than alive, ma'am. He's healed, he's strong, and he's been fighting for 2 years to get back to you. His transport lands at the airport this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. Rose's hands shook as she reached for her phone. Her first instinct was to call Naomi, to share this impossible miracle with the daughter who'd grieved her brother's loss almost as deeply as Rose had. Then reality crashed back down. "He doesn't know about Naomi," she said, more to herself than to the officer. "Know what about Naomi?" Rose looked up at Staff Sergeant Williams with eyes that held too much sorrow for one woman to carry. "She's in the hospital. In a coma. Her husband, there was an accident." The officer's expression shifted from joy to concern. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Patterson. How long has she been unconscious?" 3 weeks and 4 days. Rose stood up, suddenly energized by purpose. "I need to go to the hospital. I need to be with her when I tell Elijah. They were so close, you understand. She's going to be heartbroken that she can't welcome him home properly. Would you like me to drive you?" Rose shook her head, already reaching for her purse and car keys. "No, but thank you. This is family business now." 45 minutes later, Rose burst into room 314 with tears streaming down her face and hope blazing in her eyes for the first time in weeks. Dr. Crawford looked up from Naomi's chart, alarmed. "Rose, what's wrong? What's happened?" "Nothing's wrong," Rose said, rushing to her daughter's bedside. "Everything's right. Baby girl, your brother is alive. Elijah is alive and he's coming home today." She took Naomi's motionless hand in both of hers, squeezing tightly. "I know you can hear me in there. Your little brother is coming home and he's going to help us figure out what really happened to you. He's going to help make sure you get justice." Dr. Crawford felt her professional composure crack. "Rose, are you sure? How do you know?" "The Army sent an officer to my house this morning. Elijah's been in a military hospital for 2 years, recovering from injuries. They thought he was dead, but he wasn't. He was fighting to come back to us." Rose's voice broke with joy and grief tangled together. "He doesn't know about Naomi yet. He thinks he's coming home to a celebration. When does he arrive?" "This afternoon. I have to go pick him up at the airport, but I wanted to tell her first. I wanted her to know that her family is coming back together, even if—" Rose's voice trailed off as she looked at her daughter's still form. "Even if she can't be fully here for it yet," Dr. Crawford finished gently. "But Rose, maybe this news is exactly what she needs to hear. Maybe knowing her brother is safe will help her find her way back to us." As if summoned by their conversation, Naomi's eyelids fluttered slightly. Both women froze, watching intently. "Did you see that?" Rose whispered. Dr. Crawford was already checking Naomi's monitors, noting the slight uptick in brain activity. "I saw it. Talk to her more, Rose. Keep telling her about Elijah. Baby girl, he's been fighting so hard to come home to us. Just like you're fighting now. And when he gets here, when he sees what happened to you..." Rose's voice hardened with determination. "That man who hurt you is going to face someone who knows how to fight back." At the airport, Elijah Patterson stood in the terminal with a duffel bag over his shoulder and 2 years' worth of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. He looked different than he had when he left. Older, scarred, carrying himself with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to move through the world despite pain. But his eyes still held the warmth and determination that had made him Rose's pride and joy. He'd imagined this moment 1,000 times during his recovery. Walking through his childhood home, seeing his mother's face light up when she realized he was alive, calling Naomi to share the impossible news of his return. In none of those imagined scenarios had he expected to find his family shattered by fresh tragedy. His phone buzzed with a text from Rose. "Flight delayed, running late to pick you up. Can you wait for me at the baggage claim?" Elijah texted back that he'd wait as long as she needed, not knowing that his mother was currently breaking speed limits to get to him, her mind racing between joy at her son's return and terror about what his homecoming would really mean. Because Rose knew her son. She knew that Elijah had spent his whole life protecting the people he loved, especially his big sister who'd helped raise him after their father died. She knew that learning someone had hurt Naomi would awaken something fierce and uncompromising in her gentle boy. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew that Derek Mitchell had no idea what was about to walk back into his life. At the bar where Derek had been spending his afternoons, the same bartender was working the day shift. She'd been thinking about the man who claimed his wife fell downstairs, the man who drank alone instead of sitting in hospital rooms. Something about his story didn't sit right with her, and when a customer that morning mentioned seeing news about a domestic violence case being reopened, she'd made a mental note to pay attention. Derek stumbled in around 2 p.m., already 3 sheets to the wind from whatever he'd been drinking at home. "Little early today," the bartender observed, setting down a glass but not filling it yet. "Day off," Derek slurred. "Boss says I need to spend more time with my wife. Funny thing is, she can't even tell I'm there." The bartender's expression sharpened. "She's still unconscious?" 3 weeks now. Doctors say brain damage is likely. Even if she wakes up, she might not remember." Derek caught himself before saying too much, but the bartender had heard enough. Might not remember what? Derek looked up, suddenly realizing how much he'd revealed. "Nothing. Just the accident. Sometimes people don't remember traumatic events." "That must be a relief for you." The words were carefully neutral, but Derek felt their weight. He stood up unsteadily, throwing money on the bar. "I need to go." "Of course you do," the bartender said quietly, watching him stumble toward the exit. "Running away seems to be your specialty." After Derek left, she picked up her phone and dialed the number for the police tip line. She'd been thinking about doing it for days, and that conversation had made up her mind. "I'd like to report suspicious behavior related to a domestic violence case," she said when someone answered. "I think I've been serving drinks to a man who hurt his wife." Back at the hospital, Rose was explaining to Dr. Crawford why she needed to leave to pick up Elijah when Detective Carmen Hayes appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm glad you're here. I have some updates about your daughter's case." "What kind of updates?" "We've reopened the investigation into Naomi's injuries. I've been reviewing the evidence and I have to agree with Dr. Crawford's assessment. This doesn't look like an accident." Detective Hayes pulled out her notebook. "I'm going to need to interview Derek again, and this time I'll be asking much harder questions." Rose stood up, squaring her shoulders with new resolve. "Detective Hayes, I need to tell you something. My son is coming home today. My son who was presumed dead for 2 years, who's been fighting his way back to his family. My son who doesn't know yet that someone hurt his sister while he was gone." "Mrs. Patterson, I'm not asking you to wait to arrest Derek. I'm telling you that when Elijah finds out what happened to Naomi, that man is going to face more than just legal consequences. My son is a trained soldier, and he loves his sister more than life itself." Detective Hayes felt a chill of recognition. She'd seen what happened when military-trained men learned their loved ones had been hurt. It rarely ended well for the perpetrators. "I need to find Derek Mitchell today," she said, "before your son does." "You better hurry," Rose said, gathering her purse. "Elijah's plane lands in 30 minutes, and he's been waiting 2 years to come home to his family. He's not going to wait much longer to find out why his sister isn't there to greet him." As Rose left to collect her risen son, Dr. Crawford remained beside Naomi's bed, watching the monitors that showed increasing brain activity. Whatever was happening in Naomi's mind, her body was responding to the news of Elijah's return. "Your brother's coming home, sweetheart," she whispered. "And when he gets here, everything is going to change." In room 314 the machines kept their steady rhythm, but something was different now. Something was stirring in the darkness where Naomi had been hiding, something that sounded like footsteps approaching and felt like salvation wearing combat boots. The lost Patterson child was coming home, and Derek Mitchell's carefully constructed lies were about to meet someone who'd learned to fight in places where lying got you killed. Elijah Patterson stood in the baggage claim area, watching families reunite with their loved ones, when he saw his mother running toward him through the crowd. At 58, Rose Patterson had aged in the 2 years since he'd last seen her, But the moment she spotted him, years seemed to melt away from her face. "My baby," she cried, throwing her arms around the son she'd buried in her heart. "My sweet baby boy." Elijah held her tight, feeling the sharp edges of 2 years' worth of grief and recovery smooth out in his mother's embrace. He was taller than she remembered, broader in the shoulders, marked by scars she'd never seen. But when he smiled down at her, he was still her youngest child, the boy who'd followed Naomi around like a devoted puppy and sworn to protect his family no matter what. "I'm home, Mama," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm really home." They stood there for several minutes, crying and laughing and holding each other, before Elijah pulled back and looked around the terminal. "Where's Naomi? I thought for sure she'd be here. You know how she is about big dramatic moments." The joy in Rose's face flickered, and Elijah felt his stomach drop. "Baby, we need to talk. Something's happened while you were gone." The drive from the airport to the hospital was the longest 30 minutes of Elijah's life. Rose told him everything, about Derek's controlling behavior that had gotten worse over the months, about the night Naomi fell down the stairs, about 3 weeks of machines keeping her alive while her husband made excuses for staying away. By the time they pulled into the hospital parking lot, Elijah's hands were clenched into fists and his jaw was set in a hard line that Rose recognized from his father. "Where is he now?" Elijah asked, his voice deceptively calm. "I don't know, baby. But the police are looking for him. Detective Hayes thinks." "I don't care what the police think." Elijah got out of the car and shouldered his duffel bag. "I care about what happened to my sister." Room 314 felt like a sanctuary and a crime scene all at once. Elijah stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in the machines, the tubes, the way Naomi looked so small and still in the hospital bed. This wasn't the vibrant, laughing woman who'd video called him every week before his deployment, who'd sent care packages full of his favorite cookies and magazines she thought would make him smile. "Hey sis," he said softly, approaching the bed. "Sorry I'm late to the party." Dr. Crawford, who'd been waiting for their arrival, watched as Elijah took his sister's hand with the careful gentleness of someone trained to handle dangerous things. "Her brain activity has been increasing since your mother told her you were coming home," Dr. Crawford said. "We're hoping that hearing familiar voices might help bring her back." "She's going to come back," Elijah said with the certainty of someone who'd never accepted defeat. "Naomi's the strongest person I know. She's just waiting for the right moment." He leaned down and whispered something in his sister's ear, words only she could hear, and for a moment the monitors showed a spike in brain activity that made everyone in the room hold their breath. "Did you see that?" Rose asked. "I saw it," Dr. Crawford confirmed, studying the readouts with growing excitement. "Whatever you said to her, say it again." But before Elijah could repeat his words, Detective Hayes appeared in the doorway with an expression that meant business. "Mr. Patterson, I presume?" "I'm Detective Hayes. I need to speak with you about your sister's case." Elijah straightened to his full height, 6 feet 2 inches of controlled military bearing. "What about it?" "I understand you just learned about what happened. I know you must have a lot of feelings about that." "You could say that. Where I need your help is in understanding your sister's relationship with her husband. Your mother mentioned that Derek's behavior had been concerning. Did Naomi ever talk to you about problems in her marriage?" Elijah looked down at his sister, remembering conversations they'd had during his deployment. Phone calls where Naomi had seemed sad but claimed everything was fine. Video chats where she'd worn makeup that seemed heavier than usual, positioned herself carefully in front of the camera. "She never said anything directly," he said finally. "But I could tell something was wrong. Naomi's always been terrible at hiding when she's unhappy, even when she tries." "Did she ever mention being afraid of Derek?" "Not in so many words. But there were things." Elijah's voice trailed off as memories surfaced. "The last time we talked, maybe 3 weeks before I was hurt, she asked me about self-defense. Said she was thinking about taking a class at the gym. When I asked why, she just said a woman should know how to protect herself." Detective Hayes made notes. "Did that seem unusual for her?" "Naomi's always been careful, but she's never been scared. If she was thinking about self-defense, it was because she felt threatened by something. Or someone." Rose reached over and squeezed her son's free hand. "Baby, Detective Hayes is trying to build a case against Derek. But she needs proof, and right now the only witness is unconscious," Elijah finished. He looked directly at Detective Hayes. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to stay calm and let the law handle this. I know that's not what you want to hear, but vigilante justice won't help your sister." "And what if the law fails her?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Detective Hayes had been a cop long enough to recognize the look in Elijah's eyes, the look of a man who'd been trained to solve problems with direct action, who'd spent 2 years fighting his way back to his family only to find them under attack. The law won't fail her, Detective Hayes said firmly. I have new evidence, new witnesses. Derek Mitchell is going to face consequences for what he did. What kind of evidence? Detective Hayes hesitated, then decided transparency was better than secrets. A bartender called in a tip this morning. She's been serving Derek drinks while he talks about his wife's accident. According to her, his story doesn't add up, and his behavior suggests guilt rather than grief. Where is he now? We're looking for him. He hasn't been home or at work today. Elijah's expression darkened. He's running. We don't know that. I know that. Elijah stood up, his military training evident in every movement. Men who are innocent don't run when the police come asking questions. Men who are guilty do. Rose could see the storm building in her son's eyes, the same storm that used to appear when neighborhood bullies picked on his sister when they were children. Back then, Elijah's protective instincts had been fierce but manageable. Now, after 2 years of combat training and survival, those same instincts were something else entirely. Elijah, she said carefully, promise me you won't do anything foolish. He looked down at her, then at Naomi's motionless form, then back at Detective Hayes. I promise I won't do anything the law would consider foolish, he said. But if Derek Mitchell put my sister in this hospital bed, he's going to answer for it. One way or another. Detective Hayes felt a chill of recognition. She'd seen this before. Family members who took justice into their own hands when they felt the system was moving too slowly. It rarely ended well for anyone involved. Mr. Patterson, I understand your anger. But if you interfere with my investigation. I won't interfere with your investigation, Detective. I'll conduct my own. Before anyone could respond, Nurse Jasmine Torres rushed into the room with excitement written across her face. Dr. Crawford, you need to see this. Naomi's latest brain scans show significant improvement. The swelling is almost completely gone, and her neural activity is the highest it's been since she arrived. Dr. Crawford studied the results, her professional excitement tempered by cautious optimism. This is remarkable progress. If these trends continue, she could regain consciousness within the next few days. When she wakes up, Elijah said quietly, she's going to tell us exactly what happened that night. And Derek Mitchell is going to face the truth he's been running from. Rose looked at her son, seeing both the boy who'd once promised to protect his big sister and the soldier who'd learned to keep promises no matter the cost. What are you thinking about doing, baby? Elijah kissed his sister's forehead gently. I'm thinking about paying a visit to the man who hurt my family. I'm thinking about having a conversation with Derek Mitchell about choices and consequences. Elijah. Don't worry, Mama. I'm not going to do anything that will get me arrested or taken away from you again. His smile was sharp as a blade. But Derek Mitchell is about to learn what happens when you mess with a Patterson family member while their soldier brother is deployed. He stood up, shouldering his duffel bag with practiced efficiency. Detective Hayes, you do your job and I'll do mine. Between the two of us, justice is going to find Derek Mitchell. Where are you going? Rose asked. To introduce myself to my brother-in-law. I think it's time we had a family meeting. As Elijah left room 314 with the purposeful stride of a man on a mission, Detective Hayes pulled out her phone and called for backup. She had the distinct feeling that the next few hours were going to determine whether justice came through the courts or through methods the law couldn't sanction. In her hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors, Naomi's eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids, as if she was dreaming of footsteps in hallways and voices calling her name. Somewhere in the darkness of her coma, she could feel something changing, something moving toward her like thunder before a storm. Her little brother was home and Derek Mitchell's time was running out. Derek Mitchell sat in his car outside the Blue Moon Tavern, engine running, hands shaking as he stared at his phone. 17 missed calls from his lawyer, 12 from Detective Hayes, and 3 from a number he didn't recognize but suspected belonged to Rose Patterson. The alcohol wasn't working anymore. 3 drinks in, and the fear still gnawed at his stomach like acid. The bartender's questions from yesterday had shattered whatever illusion of safety he'd been clinging to. People were talking. People were suspicious. And Detective Hayes' voicemail had made it clear that the investigation into Naomi's accident was now very much active. He scrolled through news articles on his phone, searching for any mention of his case. What he found instead made his blood freeze. Local military hero returns from the dead, read the headline, above a photo that made Derek's world tilt sideways. Staff Sergeant Elijah Patterson, 25, who had been presumed dead for 2 years following a military operation overseas, had made a miraculous return home to be reunited with his family. The article mentioned that Patterson was the brother of a local woman currently hospitalized following a domestic incident. Derek's phone slipped from numb fingers. Naomi's brother was alive. The brother she talked about constantly during their early relationship, the younger brother who'd apparently worshipped her, who joined the military partly because he wanted to be strong enough to protect his family. That brother was now home, and Derek was willing to bet everything he owned that Elijah Patterson knew exactly what had happened to his sister. Inside the bar, Derek ordered a whiskey with shaking hands and tried to think. He could run, pack a bag, empty his bank account, disappear before anyone found him. But running would be an admission of guilt, and there was still a chance, however slim, that he could convince people Naomi's injuries really were an accident. "You look like a man with problems," said a voice beside him. Derek looked up to see a tall black man in military fatigues standing at the bar. The man was young, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of build and bearing that suggested serious combat training. His eyes were dark and assessing, the kind of eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Derek asked, though every instinct he had was screaming that he knew exactly who this was. "I don't think we've been properly introduced," the man said, extending a hand with deceptive politeness. "I'm Elijah Patterson. I believe you know my sister." Derek felt the whiskey turn to ice in his stomach. "Elijah. I thought, everyone said you were dead. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated." Elijah's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Amazing what you miss when you're fighting for your life overseas. Like your sister ending up in the hospital while her loving husband is nowhere to be found." "It was an accident," Derek said quickly. "She fell down the stairs. I've been devastated." "Have you?" Elijah interrupted, his voice deceptively calm. "Because from what I hear, you've been spending your devastation at the bottom of a bottle instead of beside your wife's hospital bed." Derek stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his bar stool. "I don't have to explain myself to you. Actually, you do." Elijah remained seated, but somehow his presence filled the space around them with quiet menace. "You see, Naomi is the most important person in my world. She helped raise me after our dad died. She's the one who wrote to me every single day when I was deployed. She's the person I thought about when I was lying in a field hospital wondering if I'd ever see home again." He finally stood, and Derek realized he was looking up at someone who had several inches and probably 50 pounds of muscle on him. "So when I come home to find out that my sister, my brilliant, beautiful, careful sister, supposedly fell down some stairs and ended up in a coma, and that her husband can't be bothered to sit vigil beside her bed, well, that raises some questions. I've been dealing with this the best way I know how," Derek said, backing toward the exit. "Have you now?" Elijah stepped closer. "Tell me, Derek, in all the years you've known Naomi, has she ever been clumsy?" "What?" "It's a simple question. Has my sister, in all the time you've been married to her, ever struck you as someone who falls downstairs?" Derek's mouth went dry. "Anyone can have an accident. Answer the question." The command carried the weight of military authority, and Derek found himself responding before he could think better of it. "No. She's always been graceful." "Graceful? Yes, she is. Coordinated, athletic, careful. The kind of woman who checks the railing twice before heading downstairs, who always holds on when she's carrying something heavy." Elijah's voice was getting quieter, which somehow made it more terrifying. "So help me understand how someone like that ends up with the kind of head trauma that suggests impact with a blunt object rather than a tumbling fall." "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, Derek. I'm saying it straight out. You hurt my sister. You put her in that hospital bed. And now you're sitting in bars drinking away your guilt while she fights for her life." Derek bolted for the door, but Elijah was faster. Military training had honed his reflexes to razor sharpness, and he easily intercepted Derek's escape route. "We're not done talking," Elijah said calmly. "I don't have to listen to this. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead. I'm sure Detective Hayes would love to hear from you. She's been trying to reach you all day." Derek's face went pale. "How do you know about Detective Hayes?" "Because I've been having very interesting conversations with people who care about my sister. People like her doctor, who says Naomi's injuries don't match your story. People like the bartender here, who's been listening to you drink and ramble about accidents and memory loss." Derek looked around wildly and realized the bartender, the same woman who'd been asking uncomfortable questions, was indeed watching their conversation with keen interest. "You set this up," Derek said. I didn't have to set anything up. You've been digging your own grave since the night you put your hands on my sister. Elijah's voice carried the cold precision of someone who'd learned to deliver bad news to enemies. What I did was follow the trail of your lies until I found you. You can't prove anything. Maybe not yet. But Naomi's brain activity has been improving rapidly since I got home. The doctors think she might wake up soon. Elijah leaned closer, and Derek could smell the dangerous calm that surrounded him like cologne. When she does, she's going to tell everyone exactly what happened that night. She's going to tell them about your hands around her throat, about the rage in your eyes, about the moment you decided to hurt the woman who loved you. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Elijah pulled out his phone and showed Derek a photo of Naomi in her hospital bed, surrounded by machines. This is what you did to my sister. This is what your anger and your weakness created. And when she wakes up, she's going to make sure you pay for every single moment she's lost to your violence. Derek stared at the photo, seeing his wife's battered face surrounded by tubes and wires, and felt something break inside him. The guilt he'd been drowning in alcohol crashed over him like a wave. I didn't mean for it to go that far, he whispered. There it is, Elijah said softly. The truth. She was going to leave me. She said she'd had enough, that she was done trying to make our marriage work. I lost control. You lost control, so you tried to kill her. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Elijah's voice cut through Derek's protests like a blade. You put your hands on my sister in anger and now she's fighting for her life. That's not loss of control, Derek. That's attempted murder. Derek collapsed back into his chair, the weight of his actions finally crushing what remained of his denial. What are you going to do? Elijah studied him for a long moment, and Derek saw something in the soldier's eyes that was somehow worse than anger. He saw disappointment. Disgust. The look a good man gives to someone who's revealed himself to be fundamentally broken. I'm going to make sure you face the consequences of what you've done. Legal consequences, social consequences, personal consequences. Elijah straightened to his full height. And then I'm going to make sure you never get close enough to hurt my sister again. Elijah. Staff Sergeant Patterson to you. You lost the right to use my first name when you put Naomi in the hospital. Derek watched helplessly as Elijah pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Detective Hayes? This is Elijah Patterson. I found Derek Mitchell and he just confessed to assaulting my sister. We're at the Blue Moon Tavern on 5th Street. You might want to bring backup, not because he's dangerous but because he's about to face justice and that can get messy. As sirens began to wail in the distance, Derek realized that his carefully constructed lies had finally collapsed under the weight of truth. Elijah Patterson had come home from the dead, and Derek's reckoning had finally begun. The only question now was whether Naomi would wake up in time to see justice served, or if her brother would have to carry the burden of speaking for her while she remained silent in her hospital bed. Either way, Derek Mitchell's time as a free man was over. The arrest of Derek Mitchell made the local evening news, complete with footage of him being led away in handcuffs while reporters shouted questions about domestic violence and his wife's condition. At General Hospital, the nurses' station buzzed with quiet satisfaction as they watched justice finally catching up to a man they'd all suspected of terrible things. In room 314, Rose Patterson sat beside her daughter's bed while Elijah paced the small space with restless energy. The confrontation with Derek had left him wired, filled with the kind of adrenaline that came after completing a dangerous mission. You did the right thing, baby, Rose said, though her voice carried the weight of a mother's worry. But I'm glad you didn't do anything that would have gotten you arrested too. The thought crossed my mind, Elijah admitted, pausing by the window that overlooked the parking lot. When I saw him sitting there drinking while Naomi was fighting for her life, I wanted to hurt him the way he hurt her. But you didn't. No. Because Naomi wouldn't want me to throw away my future for trash like Derek Mitchell. And because she's going to wake up, and when she does, I want to be here for her, not in a jail cell. Dr. Crawford entered the room with Naomi's latest test results and an expression that carried hope like a carefully held flame. I have good news. Naomi's brain scans show continued improvement. The swelling is almost completely gone, and her neural pathways are showing activity patterns that suggest she's very close to regaining consciousness. How close? Rose asked, leaning forward in her chair. It could be hours or it could be days. But all the indicators suggest that she's fighting her way back to us. Dr. Crawford moved to check Naomi's monitors, noting the steady improvements in heart rate and brain activity. I think hearing about Derek's arrest might be exactly what her subconscious needed to feel safe enough to wake up. Elijah moved to his sister's bedside, taking her hand with the same gentle care he'd shown since arriving. "Did you hear that, sis? The monster's in jail where he belongs. You're safe now." As if in response to his voice, Naomi's eyelids fluttered slightly, and her fingers twitched in his grasp. "She's responding," Dr. Crawford said, moving closer to observe. "Naomi, if you can hear us, try to squeeze your brother's hand." For a moment nothing happened. Then, so faintly it might have been imagination, Naomi's fingers pressed against Elijah's palm. Rose gasped, standing up so quickly her chair nearly toppled. She squeezed. "I saw it," she squeezed his hand. "I felt it too," Elijah said, his voice thick with emotion. "Come on, Naomi. Come back to us. We're all here waiting for you." Dr. Crawford made notes on her chart while trying to contain her professional excitement. After 3 weeks of uncertainty, Naomi Patterson was finally showing definitive signs of emerging from her coma. "Should we call Detective Hayes?" Rose asked. "Let her know that Naomi might be waking up soon?" "I already did," Elijah said. "She's on her way. But first, Naomi needs to know she's safe, surrounded by people who love her, and that the man who hurt her can never touch her again." They maintained their vigil as afternoon faded into evening, taking turns talking to Naomi, reading to her, playing the music she'd always loved. Gradually, her responses became stronger, more definitive hand squeezes, slight movements of her head, the flutter of eyelashes that suggested she was fighting her way toward consciousness. Detective Hayes arrived just as the sun was setting, painting room 314 in warm orange light that made everything feel hopeful despite the gravity of the situation. "Any changes?" she asked, settling into the fourth chair they'd brought in to accommodate Naomi's growing circle of supporters. "She's been responding to voices and touch for the past few hours," Dr. Crawford reported. "I expect she'll regain full consciousness within the next 12 to 24 hours. Good. Derek Mitchell is in custody, but his lawyer is already talking about plea bargains. Having Naomi's testimony will make all the difference in ensuring he faces appropriate consequences." "What kind of consequences are we talking about?" Elijah asked, his voice carrying the edge of someone who'd prefer to handle justice personally. "Domestic violence in the first degree, assault with intent to cause great bodily harm, possibly attempted murder depending on what Naomi remembers about that night. We're looking at significant prison time." "Good," Rose said firmly. "That man deserves every day he spends behind bars." As they talked, none of them noticed the subtle changes happening in the hospital bed beside them. Naomi's breathing was becoming less mechanical, more natural. Her eyelids were moving more frequently. And deep in the darkness of her coma, she was beginning to hear voices that sounded familiar, voices that called her name with love instead of anger. The sound of her mother's voice, warm and worried and infinitely patient. The sound of a man who called her sis, with such tenderness that it made something inside her chest flutter with recognition. And beneath it all, the absence of another voice, the voice that had filled her nightmares for weeks, the voice that had whispered threats and curses and promises of violence. That voice was gone, replaced by safety and love and the kind of protection she'd almost forgotten existed. Around 9 p.m., as visiting hours were winding down, Naomi's eyes opened for the first time in nearly 4 weeks. The awakening wasn't dramatic, no sudden sitting up or gasping for air like in the movies. Instead, her eyes simply fluttered open, unfocused and confused, blinking in the soft light of the hospital room. "Naomi?" Rose whispered, afraid to hope too much too quickly. "Baby girl, are you awake?" Naomi's gaze wandered around the room, taking in the machines, the flowers, the faces of people she loved. When her eyes found Elijah's, they widened with shock and disbelief. "Eli?" she whispered, her voice barely audible after weeks of silence. "Hey there, beautiful," he said, tears streaming down his face as he squeezed her hand. "Miss me?" "You're dead," she said, confusion clouding her features. "They told us you were dead." "I got better," Elijah said with a shaky laugh. "Turns out I'm harder to kill than anyone expected." "I don't understand." Naomi tried to sit up, wincing as her body protested the movement. "Where am I? What happened?" Dr. Crawford moved closer, checking her pupils with a small flashlight. "Naomi, I'm Dr. Crawford. You're in the hospital. You've been unconscious for almost 4 weeks. Do you remember what happened?" The question brought shadows into Naomi's eyes. Slowly, painfully, memory began to surface. The fight with Derek, his rage when she told him she was leaving, the moment his control finally snapped completely. "Derek," she whispered, and everyone in the room saw her flinch at the name. "He can't hurt you anymore," Elijah said firmly. "He's in jail, Naomi." He's been arrested for what he did to you. What he did. Naomi's hand went to her head, feeling the bandages and healing wounds she couldn't see. How bad was it? Bad enough, Rose said, taking her daughter's other hand. But you're alive, baby girl. You're awake and you're going to be okay. I remember telling him I was leaving, Naomi said slowly, pieces of that terrible night falling into place. He got so angry. Angrier than I'd ever seen him. And then. She shuddered, closing her eyes against the memory. You don't have to talk about it now, Detective Hayes said gently. You've just woken up. You need time to recover, to process everything that's happened. No, Naomi said, opening her eyes with new determination. I want to talk about it. I want everyone to know what he did to me, what he's been doing to me for months. Naomi, Rose started. Mama, I need to do this. I need to tell the truth. Naomi looked directly at Detective Hayes. Derek Mitchell tried to kill me because I told him I was leaving him. And if I don't speak up now, he might hurt someone else's daughter, someone else's sister. Dr. Crawford checked her monitors one more time, noting the strong, steady rhythms that indicated Naomi was not only awake but alert and determined. Are you sure you're ready for this? She asked. I'm ready, Naomi said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I've been ready for weeks. I just needed to wake up first. Detective Hayes pulled out her recording device and notebook, preparing to take the testimony that would ensure Derek Mitchell faced the full consequences of his actions. Whenever you're ready, Naomi. Tell me what happened the night you were injured. Naomi looked around the room at the faces of people who loved her. Her mother, her brother who'd returned from the dead, the doctor who'd fought to save her life, the detective who'd fought to find the truth. She was surrounded by strength and support and unconditional love. Derek Mitchell had tried to destroy her, but instead, he'd only made her stronger. It started with me telling him I'd had enough, Naomi began, her voice clear and unwavering. I told Derek that I was leaving him, that I couldn't live with his anger and control anymore. And that's when he showed me exactly why I was right to be afraid. As Naomi began to tell her story, room 314 transformed from a place of sorrow and waiting into a place of truth and justice. The long nightmare was finally ending, and the healing could truly begin. The morning after Naomi's awakening, room 314 had transformed into an impromptu command center for justice. Detective Hayes sat with her recorder and notepad, documenting every detail of Naomi's testimony while Dr. Crawford monitored her patient's vitals to ensure the emotional stress wasn't causing medical setbacks. Rose held one of her daughter's hands while Elijah held the other, providing an anchor of family support as Naomi relived the worst night of her life. Derek had been getting more controlling for months, Naomi said, her voice steady but soft. It started with small things, questioning where I went, who I talked to, checking my phone when he thought I wasn't looking. Then it escalated to verbal abuse, threats about what would happen if I ever tried to leave him. Did you ever report these threats to the police? Detective Hayes asked. I thought about it, but Derek was always careful about what he said and how he said it. He never threatened me in front of witnesses, never left marks I couldn't hide. I told myself it wasn't bad enough yet, that maybe I could fix things if I just tried harder. Rose squeezed her daughter's hand. Baby, this wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault. I know that now, Mama. But at the time I kept thinking I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic. Naomi's voice grew stronger as she continued. The night it happened, I had finally worked up the courage to tell him I was leaving. I'd been planning it for weeks, finding an apartment, saving money he didn't know about, getting my important documents together. What triggered the confrontation that night? Detective Hayes asked. I came home from work and told him I'd put down a deposit on an apartment. I said I was moving out that weekend, that I couldn't pretend our marriage was working anymore. Naomi's breathing quickened slightly as she remembered. At first he just stared at me. Then he started laughing, this cold, horrible sound. He said I was never leaving him, that no one would want a broken woman like me. Elijah's free hand clenched into a fist, but he kept his voice gentle when he spoke. What happened next, sis? He grabbed my phone and threw it against the wall, said I wouldn't be needing it where I was going. When I tried to walk past him to get to the bedroom, he blocked my path. He said if I tried to leave him, he'd make sure I regretted it for the rest of my life. Did he physically restrain you at that point? Detective Hayes asked. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. When I tried to pull away, he slammed me against the kitchen counter. Naomi's voice began to shake, but she pressed on. That's when I knew I was in real danger. The look in his eyes, it was like he'd become someone else entirely. Dr. Crawford checked the monitors, noting elevated heart rate and blood pressure but nothing that suggested immediate danger. "Naomi, do you need to take a break?" "No, I need to finish this." Naomi looked directly at Detective Hayes. Derek grabbed me by the throat and started squeezing. He said if he couldn't have me, no one could. I tried to fight him off, but he was so much stronger. "How did you end up with the head injury?" Detective Hayes asked gently. When I couldn't breathe, I started clawing at his hands, trying to make him let go. He got angry and shoved me away from him. I fell backward and hit my head on the edge of the kitchen counter. The last thing I remember is the sound it made when my skull cracked against the granite. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of monitors and the quiet sound of Rose crying. Detective Hayes made careful notes while Elijah stared at his sister with a mixture of admiration and rage. "What's the next thing you remember?" Detective Hayes asked. "Waking up here yesterday, seeing Eli's face and thinking I was dreaming." Naomi managed a small smile at her brother. "I still can't believe you're really alive." "I'm really here, and I'm never leaving you alone with monsters again," Elijah said firmly. Detective Hayes closed her notepad and turned off the recorder. "Naomi, what you've just told me is going to put Derek Mitchell away for a very long time. Attempted murder, domestic violence, assault with intent to cause great bodily harm, we're looking at 15 to 20 years minimum." "Good," Rose said fiercely. "That man deserves every day he spends in prison." "There's something else," Detective Hayes continued. "Derek's lawyer approached me this morning about a plea deal. He wants to avoid trial by pleading guilty to lesser charges in exchange for a reduced sentence." "Absolutely not," Elijah said before anyone else could respond. "That coward doesn't get to hide from what he did." "The decision isn't yours to make," Detective Hayes said diplomatically. "It's ultimately up to Naomi and the prosecutor's office." All eyes turned to Naomi, who had grown quiet and thoughtful during this exchange. Finally she spoke. "I want him to face the full consequences of his actions. No plea deals, no reduced charges. Derek tried to kill me because I had the audacity to want a life without his abuse. Other women need to see that there are real consequences for domestic violence, that the system will fight for them if they find the courage to speak up. Going to trial will mean testifying publicly, reliving this trauma in front of a jury," Detective Hayes warned. "It won't be easy." "Nothing about this has been easy," Naomi replied. "But I'm stronger now than I was before. I have my family back, I have people who believe me, and I have the truth on my side. Derek Mitchell is going to face a jury and answer for what he did." Dr. Crawford had been quietly observing throughout the interview, and now she stepped forward with professional concern. "Naomi, I admire your courage, but we need to focus on your physical recovery as well. You've been in a coma for almost 4 weeks. Your body needs time to heal." "How long before I can go home?" Naomi asked. "If your recovery continues at this pace, probably another week or 2. We need to make sure there's no lasting neurological damage, that your motor skills are fully intact." Dr. Crawford paused. "Where is home for you now? Obviously, you can't go back to the house you shared with Derek." The question hung in the air like a challenge. In all the focus on justice and recovery, they hadn't addressed the practical realities of Naomi's new life. "She's coming home with me," Rose said immediately. "To the house where she grew up, where she'll be safe and loved." "I can't live with you forever, Mama," Naomi protested gently. "You can live with us for as long as you need to," Elijah corrected. "I'm home now, sis. I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you. We're family, and family takes care of each other." For the first time since waking up, Naomi began to cry, not from pain or trauma but from relief and gratitude. After months of feeling isolated and alone in her marriage, she was surrounded by people who would move mountains to keep her safe. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Detective Hayes said carefully. "Derek Mitchell posted bail this morning." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What do you mean he posted bail?" Elijah's voice carried a dangerous edge. "It's a high bail amount and he had to surrender his passport, but legally, the man who tried to murder my sister is walking free while she's still in a hospital bed?" Elijah stood up, his military training evident in every line of his posture. "He has a restraining order that prohibits any contact with Naomi or your family. If he violates that order, he'll have to deal with me," Elijah said flatly. "Elijah," Rose warned. "No, Mama. I've been patient. I've worked with the system, done things the right way. But if Derek Mitchell thinks he can walk free while my sister recovers from his attempt to kill her, he's about to learn how wrong he is." Detective Hayes stood up as well, recognizing the signs of a man on the edge of vigilante justice. "Mr. Patterson, I understand your anger, but..." Do you? Elijah turned to face her fully. Do you understand what it's like to come home from war only to discover that while you were gone, someone was waging war against your family? Do you understand what it feels like to know that the man who tried to kill your sister is sleeping in his own bed tonight while she's surrounded by machines? Eli, Naomi said softly, and her brother's attention immediately focused on her. I need you here with me, not in jail for assault. Promise me you won't do anything that will take you away from us again. Elijah looked at his sister, seeing the fear in her eyes, not fear of Derek, but fear of losing her brother again. Slowly he sat back down and took her hand. I promise I won't do anything that will take me away from you, he said carefully. But I also promise that Derek Mitchell will never hurt you again. Whatever it takes. Detective Hayes made a mental note to keep an eye on both Elijah Patterson and Derek Mitchell. In her experience, situations like this rarely stayed peaceful for long. I'll have patrol cars drive by Derek's house regularly, she offered. And Naomi, once you're discharged, we'll discuss additional security measures. Thank you, Naomi said. But I'm not going to live my life in fear anymore. Derek tried to destroy me, but I survived. I'm going to heal, I'm going to testify, and I'm going to make sure he faces justice. Then I'm going to build a life so full of love and purpose that what he did to me becomes just a chapter in my story, not the whole book. Rose looked at her daughter with fierce pride. That's my girl. That's our girl, Elijah corrected, and for the first time since his return, his smile carried no shadows of war or worry. The fight for justice was just beginning, but the Patterson family was ready for whatever came next. They'd survived loss, trauma, and separation. They'd found each other again against impossible odds. Derek Mitchell might be free on bail, but his victims were no longer powerless. And sometimes that made all the difference in the world. Derek Mitchell sat in his empty house, staring at the kitchen counter where his wife's blood had stained the granite before the crime scene cleaners removed all evidence of that terrible night. The bail money had cost him everything. His savings, his retirement account, even the title to the house his lawyer now held as collateral. But he was free, at least temporarily, and that was all that mattered. The restraining order lay on the coffee table beside his ankle monitor, its legal language spelling out the boundaries of his conditional freedom. No contact with Naomi Patterson or any member of her family. No visiting the hospital. No going within 500 feet of Rose Patterson's house. What the restraining order didn't prevent was thinking. Planning. Wondering what Naomi had told the police when she'd finally woken up from her coma. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Prosecution rejected our plea offer. They're moving forward with attempted murder charges. We need to talk. Attempted murder. The words hit Derek like a physical blow. He'd been hoping they'd settle for assault, maybe domestic violence charges that would mean a few years in prison instead of decades. But with Naomi awake and talking, apparently the authorities felt confident they could prove he'd tried to kill her. The worst part was that they were right. In that moment when he'd grabbed her throat, when he'd seen the defiance in her eyes, he hadn't just wanted to hurt her. He'd wanted to make her disappear, to silence the voice that dared to tell him she was leaving. Now she was very much alive, and Derek was the one facing disappearance, into a prison cell for the rest of his life. His phone rang. His lawyer. Derek, we need to discuss strategy. The prosecution has Naomi's testimony, medical evidence, and apparently several witnesses who can speak to your behavior since the incident. What witnesses? A bartender who says you've been coming in regularly, drinking and talking about how your wife might not remember the accident. A work supervisor who says you've been avoiding the hospital. Even some of the hospital staff are prepared to testify about your suspicious absence during your wife's recovery. Derek closed his eyes, feeling the walls closing in around him. What are you recommending? Honestly? We try for a new plea deal. Maybe we can get them down to aggravated assault, argue that you didn't intend to cause life-threatening injuries. But I did, Derek said quietly. What? I did intend to cause life-threatening injuries. When I had my hands around her throat, I wanted her to stop breathing. I wanted her to stop talking, stop defying me, stop trying to leave me. The confession poured out of Derek like poison from a wound. I've been telling myself it was an accident, that I lost control, but that's not true. For those few minutes, I wanted my wife dead. His lawyer was quiet for a long moment. Derek, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. And you're never going to say it again to anyone ever. Do you understand? But Derek was past the point of strategic thinking. The guilt and alcohol and isolation had worn down his defenses until truth was all he had left. She's going to testify, isn't she? He asked. Yes. And she's going to tell everyone what I did. Most likely. Good. Derek said, surprising himself with the word. She should tell everyone. She should make sure everyone knows what kind of man I really am. Derek. I have to go, Derek said, hanging up the phone. He walked through the house he'd shared with Naomi, seeing it now through her eyes. The wedding photos on the mantel looked like evidence of a lie. The kitchen where she'd cooked dinner every night looked like a crime scene. The bedroom where they'd slept side by side looked like a prison she'd been desperate to escape. How had he not seen it? How had he convinced himself that his anger and control were normal, that Naomi's fear was defiance instead of self-preservation? His phone buzzed again. A news alert about a local domestic violence case making headlines. There was his name, his photo from their wedding day, and a picture of Naomi being loaded into an ambulance that night. The caption read, "Local woman awakens from coma, husband charged with attempted murder." Derek realized with sick certainty that his life as he'd known it was over. Whether he spent the next 20 years in prison or somehow managed to avoid conviction, he would always be the man who tried to kill his wife. He would always be the monster in someone else's story. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Naomi was working with a physical therapist to regain full mobility after weeks of bed rest. Her balance was improving, her coordination returning, and her strength growing daily. More importantly, her resolve was hardening like steel. "The prosecution wants to meet with you tomorrow," Detective Hayes said, arriving for their daily check-in. "They want to prepare you for what defense attorneys might ask during trial." "I'm ready," Naomi said, pausing in her exercises. "What kind of questions?" "They'll try to paint Derek as a loving husband who made a terrible mistake in a moment of anger. They might suggest you're exaggerating the abuse, that you provoked the confrontation, that your injuries were accidental rather than intentional." "Let them try," Naomi said firmly. "I have medical records documenting old bruises that I hid with makeup. I have photos on my phone showing marks he left on my arms and wrists. And I have years of his verbal abuse documented in text messages I never deleted because some part of me knew I might need evidence someday." Elijah looked up from the book he'd been reading in the corner. "You kept evidence?" "I started keeping evidence about 6 months ago, when he threatened to make me disappear if I ever tried to leave him. I recorded some of our fights on my phone. I took pictures of bruises. I even wrote down dates and descriptions of his worst outbursts." Naomi's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "I guess part of me was preparing for this day even when I didn't know it." "Why didn't you leave sooner?" Detective Hayes asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. "Because leaving is the most dangerous time for women in abusive relationships. Statistics show that's when abusers are most likely to escalate to serious violence or murder. I was trying to find the right time, the right way, the right support system." Naomi's smile was bitter. "Turns out there is no right way to leave someone who believes they own you." Rose, who'd been listening quietly from her chair, spoke up. "Baby girl, I need to ask you something. Are you sure you want to put yourself through a trial? Testifying in public, having strangers judge your marriage, dealing with defense attorneys trying to tear down your story?" Naomi was quiet for a moment, considering. "Mama, do you know how many women are killed by their partners every year?" "Too many. Over 1,800. That's 5 women every day who die because someone who claimed to love them decided to hurt them instead." Naomi's voice grew stronger. "Derek had his hands around my throat. If I hadn't clawed at him, if he hadn't let go when he did, I would be one of those statistics. I'd be dead and he'd probably be telling everyone what a tragic accident it was." She stood up from the physical therapy equipment, her balance steady and her voice unwavering. "I survived, Mama. I survived, and I have a voice and I have evidence. If I don't use those things to make sure Derek faces consequences, how many other women might he hurt? How many other wives might not be as lucky as I was?" "You weren't lucky," Elijah said quietly. "You were strong. You fought back. You survived because you're a fighter. I'm a fighter and I'm going to keep fighting. In court, in public, wherever I need to. Derek Mitchell is going to face a jury of his peers, and they're going to hear exactly what he did to me. They're going to see the evidence, hear the recordings, understand that this wasn't a moment of anger, it was attempted murder." Dr. Crawford entered the room with discharge paperwork and a smile. "I have good news. All your tests came back normal. You're cleared to go home tomorrow." "Home," Naomi repeated, tasting the word. "I like the sound of that." "You're coming home with us," Rose said firmly. "To your real family where you'll be safe and loved." "For now," Naomi agreed. "But eventually I'm going to build my own home again. My own life, my own space, my own future." Derek tried to end my story, but all he really did was help me realize how strong I actually am. As evening fell over the hospital, the Patterson family made plans for Naomi's homecoming. Rose talked about preparing her childhood bedroom, about cooking all her favorite foods. Elijah discussed security measures and the logistics of getting Naomi to court appearances. None of them mentioned Derek's release on bail, though all of them were thinking about it. They didn't talk about the ankle monitor that was the only thing preventing him from violating the restraining order, or the fact that electronic monitoring had never stopped a determined abuser from tracking down their victim. But they also didn't talk about the way Elijah checked the locks on doors and windows, or how he'd started carrying himself with the hypervigilant awareness of someone expecting trouble. Some conversations didn't need words. Some preparations happened in silence. Derek Mitchell was free on bail, but his victims were no longer helpless. And in the morning, Naomi Patterson would walk out of the hospital on her own 2 feet, ready to face whatever came next. The question was whether Derek would be foolish enough to test the boundaries of his freedom, or whether he'd learned enough about the Patterson family to know that some battles were better avoided. Either way, justice was coming. The only question was what form it would take. The morning of Naomi's discharge dawned bright and clear, as if the universe itself was celebrating her return to the world of the living. Rose arrived at the hospital early with a bag of her daughter's favorite clothes: soft jeans, a comfortable sweater, and the necklace Elijah had given her before his deployment that she'd worn every day until her wedding. "I thought you might want to wear something that felt like you," Rose said, laying out the outfit on the hospital bed. Naomi fingered the necklace, a simple silver pendant with her initial that had been Elijah's way of making sure she carried a piece of their family with her wherever she went. "I stopped wearing this after Derek started making comments about it," she said quietly. "He said it was inappropriate for a married woman to wear jewelry from another man, even her brother." "Well, Derek doesn't get a vote anymore," Elijah said from the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the kind of smile that hadn't been seen in room 314 since his return. "Today you wear whatever makes you happy." As Naomi got dressed in her own clothes for the first time in nearly a month, she felt pieces of her old self clicking back into place. The woman in the mirror still looked fragile, thinner than before, with fading bruises and healing scars, but her eyes held a light that Derek had never been able to extinguish completely. Dr. Crawford arrived with discharge papers and final instructions. "I want to see you in 2 weeks for a follow-up. You're healing remarkably well, but head injuries require careful monitoring. Any severe headaches, dizziness, vision problems, or memory issues, and you call me immediately." "I will," Naomi promised. "Dr. Crawford, I want you to know how grateful I am. Not just for the medical care, but for believing that my injuries weren't accidental. For asking the hard questions when others might have looked the other way." "It's my job to advocate for my patients," Dr. Crawford replied. "But I'll admit your case affected me more than most. I'm glad to see you walking out of here on your own terms." The elevator ride down to the hospital lobby felt like a journey through time. 4 weeks ago, Naomi had arrived unconscious and broken. Now she stood upright, clear-eyed, and surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. The lobby was busier than usual, and Naomi noticed several people glancing in their direction with expressions that ranged from curiosity to sympathy. Her case had made the news, and her face was now recognizable to anyone who followed local stories. "You okay?" Elijah asked, noticing her discomfort with the attention. "I'm going to have to get used to it," Naomi said. "Part of speaking out means losing anonymity. It's a small price to pay for justice." Rose's house looked exactly the same as Naomi remembered from childhood, but walking through the front door felt like stepping into a sanctuary. The walls were covered with family photos. Naomi's graduation, Elijah in his military uniform, holidays and birthdays, and ordinary moments that had been precious enough to preserve. "Your room is ready," Rose said, leading them down the hallway to the bedroom where Naomi had spent her teenage years. The space had been updated with fresh linens and flowers, but the old bookshelf still held her favorite novels, and the window still looked out over the backyard where she and Elijah had played as children. "It's perfect, Mama," Naomi said, sitting on the edge of the bed that felt like the safest place in the world. Elijah appeared in the doorway with her suitcase, packed with belongings Rose had retrieved from the house Derek could no longer afford. Detective Hayes called. "The prosecution wants to meet with you day after tomorrow to prep for trial. Are you ready for that?" "As ready as I'll ever be." Naomi stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the garden where Rose grew tomatoes and herbs. "I keep thinking about something Dr. Crawford said, that recovery isn't just about healing from what happened, it's about building something better from the pieces that are left." "What do you want to build?" Rose asked. "A life that matters. A life that makes a difference." Naomi turned back to face her family. I want to help other women who are trapped in abusive relationships. I want to speak at shelters and support groups. I want to make sure Derek's attempt to destroy me becomes something that helps save other people. That sounds like the sister I know, Elijah said with pride. Always wanting to fix the whole world. Maybe I can't fix the whole world, but I can fix my little corner of it. They spent the afternoon settling Naomi into her childhood home, unpacking her belongings and making plans for the weeks ahead. Rose cooked all of her daughter's favorite foods, filling the house with the smells of comfort and love. Elijah made discreet security checks, ensuring doors were locked and windows secure, though he tried not to let his vigilance overshadow the joy of their reunion. As evening approached, Naomi found herself on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time in months she felt truly peaceful. That's when she saw him. Derek stood at the edge of the property, just beyond the legal boundary established by the restraining order. He wasn't moving, wasn't approaching, just standing there in the shadows between two streetlights, watching the house where his wife had found refuge. Naomi's teacup slipped from her hands, shattering on the porch floor. Eli, she called, her voice sharp with alarm. Elijah was out the door in seconds, taking in the broken cup, his sister's pale face, and the figure barely visible at the property line. Stay inside, he told Naomi, his voice carrying the command authority of his military training. Elijah, don't. I said stay inside. He was already moving toward the gate that separated the backyard from the street, his posture shifting into something predatory and dangerous. Derek saw him coming and took a deliberate step backward, maintaining the legal distance required by the restraining order while making it clear he wasn't afraid of Naomi's brother. You're walking a very thin line, Elijah called out, stopping at the property boundary. I'm not breaking any laws, Derek replied, his voice carrying across the space between them. I'm on a public street, maintaining the required distance from the house. You're stalking my sister. I'm exercising my right to travel freely in my own neighborhood. Elijah studied Derek with the calculating gaze of someone who'd learned to identify threats before they materialized. Derek looked different, thinner, haunted, with the desperate edge of a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. What do you want? Elijah asked. I want to know why she's doing this, Derek said, and for the first time his voice cracked with emotion. Why she won't accept my apology, why she's insisting on a trial, why she wants to destroy my life. She's not destroying your life, Derek. She's telling the truth about what you did to her. There's a difference. I made a mistake. You tried to murder her. It wasn't supposed to go that far. The admission hung in the evening air like a confession. Derek seemed to realize what he just said, but instead of backing down, he stepped closer to the property line. I loved her, he said, his voice breaking. I still love her. Everything I did was because I couldn't stand the thought of losing her. So you decided to kill her instead? I decided to make her understand that we belonged together. That she couldn't just throw away our marriage because things got difficult. Elijah felt his military training warring with his protective instincts. Everything in him wanted to cross that property line and finish what Derek had started the night he put his hands on Naomi. But his sister's voice echoed in his memory, I need you here with me, not in jail for assault. Derek, Elijah said, his voice deadly calm, you need to understand something. Naomi survived what you did to her. She's awake, she's strong, and she's going to testify against you. Your marriage is over. Your old life is over. The only question now is whether you accept that fact with whatever dignity you have left, or whether you force us to take more direct measures to protect my family. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining your options. You can stay away from my sister, comply with the restraining order, and face your trial like a man. Or you can keep showing up here, keep stalking her, keep making her feel unsafe in the only place she has left to heal. And if I choose option 2? Elijah's smile was sharp as a blade. Then you'll discover that the army taught me a lot more than just how to follow orders. Some lessons stick better than others, and the one about protecting innocent people from predators? That one's burned pretty deep. Derek stared at him for a long moment, weighing his options against the very real threat standing 10 feet away. Finally, he stepped back into the shadows. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is, Elijah replied. You just haven't accepted it yet. Derek disappeared into the darkness between streetlights, but Elijah remained at the property line for several more minutes, watching and listening until he was certain the threat had passed. When he finally returned to the house, he found Naomi and Rose waiting in the kitchen, both of them pale with worry. Is he gone? Naomi asked. For now. What did he want? To let us know he's watching. To remind us that an ankle monitor and a piece of paper don't make you bulletproof. Elijah sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly looking very tired. I'm calling Detective Hayes. Derek's not going to just disappear quietly into the legal system. He's going to be a problem until this trial is over. Maybe longer, Rose said quietly. No, Naomi said, her voice stronger than it had been since Derek's appearance. Not longer. The trial is going to end with him in prison for attempted murder. And once he's behind bars, we can all start building the life we deserve. What if he's acquitted? Rose asked. Naomi looked at her mother, then at her brother, then back toward the window where Derek had been standing. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'm not going to live my life afraid of what might be. Derek tried to kill me once and I survived. If he's stupid enough to try again, he'll discover that surviving the first attempt made me a lot harder to kill the second time. Elijah looked at his sister with something approaching awe. The woman who'd been unconscious in a hospital bed just days ago was now talking about facing down her would-be killer with the same calm determination their father had shown when protecting his family. All right, he said. Then we prepare for war. No, Naomi corrected. We prepare for justice. There's a difference. But as she said the words, she wondered if Derek Mitchell understood that difference, or if his desperation would force them to learn the distinction the hard way. Outside, in the shadows between streetlights, Derek sat in his car and stared at the house where his wife was building a new life without him. The ankle monitor around his ankle felt heavier with each passing hour, and the walls of his temporary freedom were closing in faster than he'd expected. Tomorrow, Naomi would meet with prosecutors to prepare for trial. Next week, she'd likely testify before a grand jury. And within months, she'd stand in a courtroom and tell the world exactly what he'd done to her. Unless something changed the trajectory of events. Derek started his car and drove into the night, his mind racing with possibilities he'd never considered before. Possibilities that crossed lines he'd never imagined he'd be willing to cross. Some boundaries once crossed changed everything. Derek Mitchell was about to discover which side of that boundary he was really willing to stand on. 3 months later, the courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras as the Derek Mitchell trial concluded its final day. Naomi Patterson walked out into the afternoon sunshine flanked by her family, her lawyer, and Detective Hayes, all of them bearing the exhausted satisfaction of people who'd fought hard for justice and won. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder in the first degree. Aggravated domestic violence. Assault with intent to cause great bodily harm. The judge had wasted no time in imposing the maximum sentence. 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 15 years. Derek Mitchell, who'd grown thinner and more desperate with each day of testimony, had collapsed when the verdict was read. His lawyer had immediately filed notice of appeal, but everyone in the courtroom knew it was a formality. The evidence had been overwhelming, Naomi's testimony devastating, and the jury's disgust with Derek's actions evident in their deliberation time. "How do you feel?" a reporter called out as Naomi reached the bottom of the courthouse steps. "I feel like justice was served today," Naomi replied, her voice clear and strong. "Not just for me but for every woman who's ever been told that domestic violence is a private matter, that they should handle their abuse quietly, that they somehow deserved what happened to them." "What's next for you?" another reporter asked. "Healing. Building. Living the life that Derek Mitchell tried to steal from me." Naomi smiled, and it was the first completely unguarded smile she'd worn in public since her ordeal began. "I'm starting a foundation to help domestic violence survivors navigate the legal system and rebuild their lives. Derek wanted to destroy me, but instead he helped me discover my purpose." Elijah stood slightly behind his sister, watchful and protective but allowing her to own this moment. The trial had been difficult for all of them, forcing them to relive the worst night of their lives in front of strangers, but it had also been transformative. Watching Naomi testify, seeing her refuse to be intimidated by Derek's lawyers or broken by their attempts to paint her as a vindictive wife, had filled him with pride and admiration. Rose, who'd attended every day of the trial, stepped up to the microphone cluster. "I want to thank everyone who supported our family through this ordeal," she said. "Dr. Crawford and the hospital staff who fought to save my daughter's life. Detective Hayes and the prosecutor's office who fought to get her justice. And most importantly, I want to thank my daughter for her courage in speaking her truth, even when it was painful, even when it was scary." Rose's voice broke slightly. No mother should have to watch her child fight for her life because someone who claimed to love her decided to hurt her instead. But if that terrible thing has to happen, then I'm grateful it happened to a daughter strong enough to survive it and brave enough to make sure other women don't have to face it alone. As they left the courthouse, Naomi found herself thinking about the moment 3 months ago when she'd awakened in the hospital to find Elijah alive and Derek in custody. It felt like a lifetime ago, though she could still remember every detail with painful clarity. The physical scars had faded, but the emotional ones remained, not as sources of pain anymore, but as reminders of her strength. She'd survived the worst thing she could imagine, and in surviving she'd discovered reserves of courage she never knew she possessed. Where to now? Elijah asked as they reached Rose's car. Home, Naomi said. Our real home. 6 months after the trial, Naomi Patterson stood in the lobby of the new Resurrection Foundation headquarters, greeting the first group of women who'd come for their support group meeting. The name had come to her during one of her early conversations with Dr. Crawford about recovery and rebuilding. The idea that surviving trauma wasn't just about healing, but about rising from the ashes of your old life to create something entirely new. Welcome everyone, she said to the circle of chairs where 8 women sat with varying degrees of hope and skepticism on their faces. My name is Naomi, and I'm a survivor of domestic violence. The words still carried weight, but they no longer carried shame. Over the months since Derek's conviction, Naomi had learned to wear her survival like armor, not as protection against future harm, but as proof that harm could be survived, that endings could become beginnings. I want to start by telling you something I wish someone had told me when I was trapped in an abusive marriage, she continued. You are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not exaggerating. And what happened to you was not your fault. Around the circle, she saw shoulders straighten and eyes brighten. These were women in different stages of their journeys, some still living with their abusers, some recently escaped, some years into recovery but still struggling with the aftermath of trauma. But they all shared the particular kind of strength that came from surviving the unthinkable. My ex-husband tried to kill me, Naomi said simply. He put me in a coma for 4 weeks because I told him I was leaving him. When I woke up, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never feel safe again, never trust again, never be anything more than a victim. She looked around the circle, making eye contact with each woman. I was wrong. My life wasn't over, it was just beginning. The woman I am now is stronger, braver, and more compassionate than the woman I was before. Derek Mitchell thought he was destroying me, but he was actually helping me become who I was meant to be. After the group session ended, Naomi walked through the foundation's offices, checking in with the counselors, lawyers, and social workers who joined her mission to help domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives. The foundation had grown faster than anyone expected, funded by donations from people who'd followed her story and wanted to support her work. Elijah appeared in her doorway, wearing the smile he'd perfected over the months since his return. Part pride, part protectiveness, part simple joy at having his sister back in his life. How was group today? He asked. Good. Hard but good. There's a new woman, Sarah, who reminds me a lot of myself 6 months ago. Scared, ashamed, convinced she's somehow responsible for what her husband does to her. Naomi sat down at her desk, looking out the window at the busy street below. It's going to take time, but she's going to be okay. You sound pretty confident about that. I am. You know why? Why? Because she walked through our doors. Because she asked for help. Because she's ready to believe that she deserves better than what she's been given. Naomi turned back to her brother. That's the hardest part, not the legal stuff, not the practical aspects of leaving. It's believing that you're worth saving. Elijah studied his sister's face, seeing the peace that had gradually replaced the haunted look she'd carried in the months immediately following her ordeal. Do you ever think about Derek? The question didn't hurt the way it would have a year ago. Sometimes. I hope he's getting help in prison, learning to understand why he did what he did. Not because I forgive him, forgiveness isn't something he's earned. But because maybe understanding his own actions will prevent him from hurting someone else when he's eventually released. That's very mature of you. No, it's very practical of me. Derek Mitchell is going to be in prison for a long time, but not forever. When he gets out, I want him to be a different person than the man who tried to kill me. Not for his sake, but for the sake of whatever woman might cross his path next. Rose appeared in the doorway behind Elijah, carrying a tray with 3 cups of tea and wearing the expression of a mother who'd watched her children survive the unthinkable and emerge stronger. I brought sustenance, she announced, setting the tray down on Naomi's desk. And I have news. What kind of news? Naomi asked, accepting her cup with a grateful smile. The kind that makes an old woman's heart sing. Dr. Crawford called. She wants to partner with the foundation to create a medical advocacy program at the hospital. Apparently, your case changed how they approach domestic violence injuries, and she wants to make sure other women get the kind of support and belief that helped save your life. Naomi felt tears prick her eyes, not the painful tears of trauma, but the healing tears of gratitude and purpose fulfilled. That's wonderful. It means no other woman will have to wonder if her doctors believe her story, if her injuries will be properly documented, if someone will fight for her when she can't fight for herself. It means you did it, baby girl, Rose said softly. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something that's going to help countless other women. Your daddy would be so proud. The mention of their father brought a moment of reverent silence. Robert Patterson had died when Naomi was 16 and Elijah was 14, leaving Rose to raise two grieving teenagers alone. He'd been a man who believed in justice, in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, in using whatever strength you had to make the world a little better for the people who came after you. He would be proud of all of us, Elijah said finally. Naomi for her courage, Mama for her strength, and even Derek for finally facing the consequences of his actions instead of running from them. You really think Derek is learning from this? Rose asked. I think prison is the only place where Derek could be forced to confront the reality of what he did without the distractions of alcohol and self-pity, Naomi replied. Whether he chooses to learn from that confrontation is up to him. But at least he's somewhere he can't hurt anyone else while he figures it out. As the afternoon sun slanted through the office windows, the three Pattersons sat in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, Rose had thought both her children were lost to her. Elijah to war, Naomi to a marriage that was slowly strangling her spirit. Now they sat together in an office dedicated to saving lives, stronger as a family than they'd ever been before. I have something to tell you both, Naomi said suddenly, setting down her teacup with hands that were steady and sure. I've been thinking about dating again. Rose and Elijah exchanged glances, the quick, wordless communication of family members who'd learned to read each other's concerns. Are you ready for that? Rose asked gently. I think so. I've been working with my therapist on trust issues, on recognizing red flags, on understanding the difference between healthy relationship dynamics and controlling behavior. Naomi smiled at their worried expressions. I'm not rushing into anything. But I also refuse to let Derek's violence rob me of the possibility of love for the rest of my life. What kind of man are you thinking about? Elijah asked, his protective instincts clearly engaged. The kind who supports my work instead of feeling threatened by it? The kind who understands that I'm a survivor, not a victim, and that my strength isn't something to be conquered or controlled. Naomi's voice grew thoughtful. Someone who sees my scars as proof of my resilience, not as damage that needs to be fixed. That's a tall order, Rose observed. Maybe. But I've learned something important over this past year. I'd rather be alone and whole than with someone who makes me feel broken. Derek convinced me that I needed him to be complete, that I was nothing without his love. Now I know that I'm everything with or without anyone else's approval. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Sarah, the new support group member Naomi had mentioned earlier, stood in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, but I wanted you to know, I called the police. I filed a report against my husband. I'm done pretending his abuse is my fault. Naomi stood up and walked over to Sarah, enveloping her in the kind of hug that said you're safe now, you're not alone, you're going to be okay without needing words. I'm so proud of you, Naomi whispered. That's the hardest call you'll ever have to make and you made it. I kept thinking about what you said in group, that we teach people how to treat us by what we're willing to accept. I don't want to accept being hurt anymore. You don't have to. Not ever again. As Sarah left to meet with one of the foundation's lawyers, Naomi returned to her desk with a sense of profound purpose. This was why she'd survived. This was why she'd endured the trial, the publicity, the painful process of rebuilding her life in the public eye. So that women like Sarah could find the courage to save themselves. You know what I realized today? She said to Rose and Elijah, who were still sitting in her office, reluctant to leave this moment of perfect family unity. What's that? Rose asked. Derek didn't try to kill me because he loved me. He tried to kill me because he feared me. He feared my strength, my independence, my refusal to be the small, controllable woman he needed me to be. In trying to destroy what he feared, he actually helped me become more of who I was meant to be. Poetic justice, Elijah observed. The best kind, Naomi agreed. Derek Mitchell spent 2 years thinking he'd won, thinking he'd silenced me forever. Instead, he gave me the loudest voice I've ever had and the strongest platform I could have asked for. He tried to end my story, but he actually just helped me write a better one. As evening approached, the Patterson family prepared to leave the foundation offices and return to the home where they'd all learned to heal together. The house that had once been Rose's alone was now truly theirs, filled with laughter and planning and the comfortable chaos of adults who'd chosen to build their lives in close proximity to each other. "What's for dinner?" Elijah asked as they walked to the car. "Your favorite," Rose replied. "I'm celebrating my daughter's 1-year anniversary of walking out of the hospital alive and my son's 1-year anniversary of coming back from the dead. I think that calls for fried chicken and all the fixings." "And tomorrow?" Naomi asked. "Tomorrow we keep living," Rose said simply. "We keep helping other people. We keep being grateful for what we have. We keep proving that love is stronger than hate, that hope is stronger than fear, and that some families are strong enough to survive anything." As they drove through the city where Naomi had nearly died and where she'd learned to truly live, the late afternoon sun painted everything in golden light. In the distance, they could see the hospital where Dr. Crawford was probably finishing her shift, still fighting for patients who needed someone to believe them. Behind them, the courthouse where Derek had finally faced justice stood as a monument to the power of truth over lies. And ahead of them, the house where they'd learned that home wasn't a place. It was the people who refused to give up on you, even when giving up would have been easier. The Patterson family had been broken by violence, separated by war, and nearly destroyed by hatred. But they'd also been healed by love, reunited by faith, and strengthened by the knowledge that they'd survived the worst and chose to build something beautiful from the pieces. Derek Mitchell had tried to write the ending to Naomi's story. Instead, he'd only provided the opening chapter of a much longer book, one filled with justice, healing, and the kind of love that survived everything life could throw at it. Some stories end with revenge. Others end with justice. But the best stories, the ones that change the world, end with redemption, hope, and the unshakable faith that tomorrow will be better than yesterday. The Patterson family was living one of those stories now, and they were writing